No mai haere mai, my name is Jeremy and this is the Maxim Institute podcast. Last month we released Rowan Light's latest paper titled Catching the Tide, New Directions for Youth NEET Policy After COVID-19. In it, he talks about the way that economic recessions can create perilous, potentially life-altering challenges for those who are in pivotal transition phases of their life. This means people leaving high school or leaving tertiary training and maybe looking for those first bottom rungs of the career ladder. Rowan notes that if we don't act now to offer specific help to youth in transition, New Zealand runs the risk of creating a lockdown generation with long-term social and economic costs. And this is particularly true for young people who are already defined as NEET or not in employment, education or training. Since 2014, there have been between 70 and 90,000 young New Zealanders who are defined as NEET in a given year, and of those, around 10% of them are long-term, having been disengaged from work or training or education for 6 months or longer. In June this year, already, the proportion of youth NEETs has nudged up by about 2%. Now, the government's job creation policies that they've already announced don't seem to offer specific help for youth in long-term patterns of NEET, and young New Zealanders lack a clear map to navigate their way out. They need sustained support to become work ready. So joining us on the podcast to talk about this process of helping young people navigate their way into the world of work is Ryan Donaldson, the General Manager of Whangarei Youth Space, or WISE. Rowan's research flagged up WISE as a brilliant example of a community organisation that is answering this complex question well, with pastoral care and long-term investment in the young people that they are serving. To read Rowan's paper with its full recommendations, you can head to our website, maxim.org.nz, and you can keep listening for my conversation with Rowan and Ryan. Starting with you, Rowan, what is it about the transitional period between the teenage years and our young adult years that's so crucial to get right? I mean, you've done this research. What did you find that makes this period so unique?
Well, I suppose when we think about young people, we have a lot of hope for our young people because it's a bit of a platitude, but they are our future. So we know that, and then we can reflect on our own experiences. We've all been a young person, and we've all been in that stage of life when we go from being a child who's kind of under the care of our parents and our mentors and our guardians and our teachers and those important people in our lives, and when we start to make the steps to becoming, I suppose, ultimately what we hope to be as an adult. And there's this interesting little in-between period of kind of young adulthood, which, as you've kind of identified there in your intro, can be connected to education, and also kind of a period of time in our life when we look to kind of transition to take on more responsibility, perhaps through employment, perhaps through new relationships. It's a period of life which I think we like to be optimistic about. It's an exciting time. It's full of opportunities and possibilities, and we encourage young people to think about what are they going to be, what sort of roles are they going to step into as young New Zealanders. What happens, and what I kind of explore in the paper is kind of essentially what are some of the dangers when those opportunities kind of dry up.
The paper's title is Catching the Tide, and that was one that you were sort of really passionate about in our comms process. Can you explain why the tide was something that really caught your imagination around this whole area?
Yeah, I do like a bit of a metaphor. I suppose it's my arts background. One of the actually terms in Te Reo Māori for young people is taiahi, and taiahi coming from the basically the root of that word coming from tai, referring to basically like if we can imagine the tidal forces around our islands, so the ebb and flow of the tide. And I quite like that imagery of young people as kind of in a time of life when they are changing. They're going from one to the other, and which is I think what we hope for our young people. We hope that they do transition into kind of a new role in society, and that transition might be marked through finishing education, perhaps graduating, completing an apprenticeship, perhaps entering into full-time work, perhaps, but also relationships and many other ways that we kind of want to signal that transition to adulthood. And so catching the tide is really about identifying both the opportunity and the excitement that comes from being a young adult, but also the way in which that's such a really crucial time for our young people, because if they miss those opportunities and if they don't have a clear transition from being a child, so under the care of a guardian or a mentor or or their parents or teachers to take sort of coming into their own and finding their own sense of freedom and their own sense of purpose.
And the ability to support themselves as well.
Absolutely.
Because that sense of catching the tide, I mean, I'm not a surfer, but body surfing, there's a definite sense of, when you actually catch that wave that brings you in, and there's that power behind you and you sort of feel that momentum, or if you just lose it and you slip off the back, or you get totally just wiped out by the wave, these are all things that can happen for young people. And when we see the number of youth NEETs, and that's kind of a sort of a statistic that expresses the young people who haven't necessarily been lifted by this experience or this moment in their life where they should hopefully be lifted into kind of connections into work, connections into having skills that allow them to work, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and it's really thinking in terms of like employment's an easy kind of way to measure that transition, but it's kind of what sits underneath employment as well. It is those relationships, and it's the connections and the kind of habits and attitudes that come with work, which we can talk a bit about. So I suppose, I wanted to emphasize in that title the kind of urgency as well, that exactly what it means to be when whether you're into sailing or swimming, or when you miss the tide, you're kind of really stuck and you can't.
It's really kind of locked out for a while.
Exactly, and certainly we've been talking a lot about thinking about the lockdown and how it's affected all manner of communities and groups of New Zealanders, but certainly a lot of the international data stresses the particular impact on young people, and that we are substantially facing a kind of lockdown generation.
What's interesting about this is, Rowan, you were actually part of this cohort, this young cohort that was in this transitional stage of life during the last recession, the GFC in 2008, 2009. Obviously, you now have employment. You are working here. I guess my question is, what did you see for your friends and your peer group that was different from, say, my peer? I mean, I graduated around 2003, 2004, or high school at least, and didn't have that kind of those gaps of opportunities that maybe you did. So can you just describe what that feeling was like when you could sense that things were going to be different for you guys?
Yeah, and that was part of the personal appeal of the topic. In fact, I think the class of 2020 are actually facing such bigger challenges. So in some ways, the GFC and the kind of the global recession kind of pales in comparison. But certainly, it's very interesting, Jeremy, you mentioned there kind of even the cohorts before 2008, 2009, and even the ones after were much less impacted. So there was a real clear impact. Fortunately, in New Zealand, we've actually had some really, really interesting research done on those cohorts. So those born in 1991, 1990, and how that compares to, say, even those who graduated from school a few years later, around those who'd been born in 1994. So I suppose what happened, the New Zealand statistics identified kind of 6 big impacts which draws a lot of which we can see a lot of parallels with 2020. So work disappeared. So a lot of work opportunities disappeared.
What does that look like? What does work opportunities disappearing look like?
If we can imagine areas like retail, retailers closing or reducing hours, tourism being impacted, say in 2020, we can see that being a really major part of the recession. If we can, we've all got stories as maybe school leavers or those like sort of late senior high school years, and we can think back to our first job and how crucial that was, because it's really hard for a young person who hasn't worked to be able to get that early job. The employer, an employer kind of takes a bit of a risk on bringing on a green kind of young worker, but those opportunities are crucial, aren't they? Because if without that first initial kind of piece of experience on your CV, it can be really hard later on to actually convince employers to give you.
You don't really have anything on your CV.
Yeah. You can only get so far on a great sort of personality and sort of teamwork. So basically, one thing which comes through in this sort of reflections on the GFC and people my age who were leaving school was how it affected people unevenly. And that's a crucial kind of lesson, I think, for 2020, is that some people, young people, will be okay and they'll manage, and But those who are already in difficult economic situations, so for example, those leaving school at the end of the 2000s, their parents were more likely to have experienced economic difficulty from the recessions in the 1990s. So there's definitely generational aspects to this. It's not just about what COVID, say in 2020, how COVID-19 has affected people, but it's actually like those broader trends in unemployment and economic recession that we see compounding. New Zealanders already in vulnerable communities, in vulnerable situations will be the ones who are really impacted. So I think of myself, I was fortunate that I had, my grandfather who is a kind of community leader in this area that I grew up in Auckland, and he was able to get me a job in the local school, just mowing the lawns and earning some good money, and it just gave me some good experience and good connections, and I was able to get that role because of family and because of those social networks that supported me. But not all New Zealanders will have those opportunities. Not all of them will have a mentor figure who can step in and has the time to do that. So I was fortunate. Many New Zealanders won't have those opportunities. Another difference that we could draw out between the GFC and today is the opportunity to actually go overseas. So actually there was certainly a small group of young New Zealanders who after 2008, 2009, and this actually I can think of a lot of people in my cohort who took that opportunity. They went to Australia so we have those kind of valves on our economy which we've historically New Zealanders have been able to draw on. Go to the UK, go to do a gap year,
find opportunity somewhere else.
Yeah, and so of course those opportunities are not there in 2020 because of the border restrictions.
Ryan, you're really passionate about, obviously you have devoted your life and what you're doing at the moment for quite a while to this transitional space, this time where young people are kind of finding their feet, finding who they are and looking to sort of step out on their own. How did you get into this space and what makes you so passionate about it?
Interesting here from Rowan's own journey as well, in terms of those mentor relationships, because essentially that's what shaped me in this direction going forward. So I grew up in Whangarei, just a little bit south of Whangarei, a place called Ruakaka. There's a beach there, and it's pretty well known to a lot of Aucklanders, so you have a lot of people coming up in the summer holidays. But essentially, when I was about 15, I found out I was going to become a parent, which is a different story altogether. But essentially, I moved into Whangarei with my partner, who's now my wife, living with her mum. So obviously dropped out of school, moved into a big sort of town in comparison to Ruakaka, which is one sort of shop, and that's what you've sort of got. But here I found myself as a NEET essentially. So I wasn't going to school. I was saying I wanted to work more to the fact that because that's what my parents have done, that's how you sort of, as a role of a father, you provide for your family. So I really had that installed into me. Then I need to find a sort of direction where I can get some work or whatever, and school didn't feel like the right thing for me. Anyways, essentially my daughter was born how many months down the road, and I'd done little odd bits of work experience, but I didn't really find, I did a building, I did some like a hammerhand role, for about 6 weeks or something like that, but it just didn't feel me, and that's probably because I'm not practical enough to understand the natures and the complications of actually building a house. So that wasn't for me. Essentially, I found myself, still at home. My daughter was born by then, and my partner actually got a role. She was really, keen to become a midwife after going through childbirth and just having that support for her throughout that process, and that's really what set her on that pathway. But I didn't quite find mine yet. Back to, I can't remember what year it is now, I think I was 16, and I had a visit one day from a local social worker who was I'd never met him before. He's an English or Welsh guy, moved over here quite recently with his partner. They're about to have a baby. And he was really keen to set up not a young dads group, but a dads program to support dads, essentially. It was a pilot program. He hadn't done it before. Essentially what happened is he threw a whole bunch of us sort of dads, and I was the youngest one by far, and I was in this group with Black Power members and all sorts of things. It was really, really interesting, but we bonded. It was a really cool experience. But what happened is he took me under his wing, and I was really reluctant to even go along to these programs. And I see a lot of the stuff when we're talking about NEETs, is that, I think the biggest thing is motivation and incentive. And so I had no motivation whatsoever to even join this course or this workshop. And so, I did. He sold me. There was food there, and it was a good excuse to get out of the house, away from my mum-in-law for a bit, who was nagging me about getting a job, and all these sort of things. So actually, that was my space and became my space. And that's kind of where I felt, actually, this is really cool, this experience. So I stayed with it, and I was just, really keen to learn. I helped it as much as I could. And he actually said, would you, really have loved having you part of this program. I think I became his favorite quite soon, because I was just always helping out. And he took me under his wing to run and facilitate the next program. But I think the real big thing was there was this guy who, and I've had multiple people in my life do this, like have just come out of nowhere and just offered a hand up. I didn't know him from a bar of soap, but he just came into my life, and he just saw something in me. He just wanted to give me these opportunities to connect with my community, to sort of do things that for me created purpose. And I loved it. And to this day, like, I'm really good friends with him. I meet him for a coffee once a month and just talk about work. He's a manager of a different service now, and so he's been able to witness my journey. So he's become this almost lifelong mentor to me, and he sort of set me in the pathway of becoming a social worker. Essentially, that's how I sort of got involved with it. And then through that process, I got involved in the setup of, it was a community project then, where it was talking about, setting up more youth development opportunities in Whangarei. One of the key things that came out of that was we wanted, from the voices of the young people, and I was about 17 at this time, we wanted our own space in Whangarei. At the time, there was nothing. If you wanted to go have a game of pool, you had to go to a pub with a parent. There was just nothing really there. The other place that we could essentially go to get support or hang out was the library. So that wasn't well utilised.
I mean, no shade to libraries.
No. Oh, man, amazing resource.
They don't have pool tables.
They don't have pool tables, and you can't make the most noise in there too. So for young people, it's probably not the ideal place. But at that time, it's probably around 2011, 2012, suicides was going on the rise, and it was well documented. Everyone was talking about the suicides. At that time, I was working at the hospital. Through my journey, I ended up working at the local hospital and the mental health unit, funny enough. But I was still involved in this youth space project. And so, suicides, there was a lot of talk about suicides. There was a lack of support for young people in Whangarei, and all these sort of things just, came together essentially and snowballed. And so the project really started kicking off for this dedicated youth space in Whangarei, in the CBD. And so there was a youth group, about 12 of us in this youth group, and I was the chairperson at the time. I don't know why. I think it's just because I was probably the oldest in the group. And alongside that, there was a series of organisations from around Whangarei that were really keen to support this project. And essentially, we all came together, and it just snowballed from there, and Whangarei Youth Space was born. And I stepped into the role of trustee. So I've had this long journey with youth space, and that's kind of really what got me started. And I guess for me, the biggest thing is the real community development aspect of the role as well. Not necessarily just for young people, but for our community of Whangarei, I can just see a lot of stuff where we can do things a lot smarter and improve our community by working really well together. So that's something I'm really passionate about doing too, going forward.
When you say community development, I mean, you have an idea in your head of what that means. What do you, like, community development, developing from what to what?
Yeah.
Like, what is the problem you see, and what's the vision you hold for it?
I think the vision is that our community have the answers to solve the problems that's lying in the community, and I think for Whangarei in particular, we look to our government organisations to save us, to bail us out of, situations all the time. And you hear it often, that the community have the answers, and they just need to be able to voice those, and in a space that's supportive enough to be able to be heard from, whether it's government or, at the time when we were setting the Youth Space project up, the big thing really was, for years, as young people have been saying, we'd love to have a support service, a dedicated space that we could just go and hang out with and connect with our friends, or, access free health support or whatever, but and that's all just been filed along in a cabinet somewhere as a great idea at the time, and then someone's moved into a different role and nothing sort of eventuated from that. So really, for me, the biggest catalyst that happened and why Youth Space is a success, and why I'm so proud of it, is because as young people, we sort of voiced what we wanted, and it came to life through the support of these adults that really gave a damn about what these young people wanted and actually made it happen for us. So I think there's that real, that's kind of brings it back to now, in terms of actually we can, by working together, actually make huge change for ourselves and make a bit long-lasting impact.
It's almost like it's talking to young people, not just about young people.
Oh, exactly. And I think that's something that I'm really passionate about driving as well, even to this day. The big thing about Youth Space is that, and really what sets us apart, is that half of our board of trustees are young people, 18 to 24. So again, that whole thing of not trying to lose the voice of young people. We didn't want to set up an organisation for youth, run by adults, that just lost the relevancy and really what made us different. So I think, yeah, definitely, that's how it should be. And a lot of the stuff we do is around youth adult partnerships as well, and the reciprocation of the knowledge base from, young people being able to share to adults, actually, this is really what's relevant these days. This is what we're thinking. This is how you guys can stay on top of your game by hearing us. But also, to counteract that, there's a lot of knowledge in there that young people, we're not so receptive to hear. I say I'm 27 now, but, there's that naiveness and stuff that, but actually when you start to have those communications, and a lot of it comes down to those mentoring relationships where actually you see value on what that person's saying to you, so you're going to listen to it and actually work with them to receive a set outcome or something. There's real beauty in that relationship, eh? And I think in Māori, that's tōkanga teina is a very similar model approach where, the old take on the young to sort of teach them the ways so they can replace them eventually. And there's that sort of reciprocal process there. I think it's really awesome.
Obviously, you started out with the sense of young people want a space, they want pool, they want, they want a place that they can go to in town. Obviously, now you're doing a lot more. So, what was the, what do you do, particularly in this kind of transition to work and education and all that sort of stuff, and how did that eventuate?
Definitely. So, Whangarei Youth Space operates as a one-stop youth shop, essentially. So I think you could think of it as the information hub for what youth services are happening in Whangarei for the community. So young people can go there, whānau could go there. Maybe there's a young person that's just moved to Whangarei and they don't know, what potential courses are out there, what work employment opportunities are out there. They can actually sign up to access our free healthcare from a nurse and a GP, totally free for 12 to 24-year-olds. So essentially there's that hub aspect to it, that sort of drop-in model where there's no wrong door. You can walk in there and get support and walk out of there feeling, okay, I've got some direction going forward. That's our goal at the end of the day, to support young people in that aspect. But so yeah, we got that youth space, which is cool, and we've got youth workers that sort of work in there. We do after school programs, holiday programs and stuff like that. It's great. But then I think this has kind of opened up the opportunity for us to look at the community again and say, actually, how can we make that bigger change for our community? So that's really where, for me personally, why Start came into play when the opportunity came up. Is that we've been working with NEETs for years. Because we have a drop-in space of young people, we get all sorts of young people coming in, homeless youth, just people coming in for a first feed of the day, essentially, on their way to school. So we see all sorts of young people coming in for our doors, all the way to prefects and stuff that's just coming here to find some quiet space to do their homework. But with NEETs in particular, I guess what we had sort of witnessed and noticed was that there'd been a lot of government initiatives focus on getting NEETs off the benefit and into either a course or into a job. But for us working in the community space, we would see that I suppose it was like a wheel. So they'll join into a program, they'll be in there for a few months and then they come back and they're straight back on the dole again. So while it might look good to MSD or whatever, and this is not to throw any shade towards MSD, but I guess we're seeing the people and they might be seeing the potential outcomes at the time. So, it might look great that there's less NEETs statistically, but that's just because they're in a program or a course where they're essentially a bum on a seat.
For a certain amount of time.
And then they find themselves back in the same situation again. They might have a certificate in a hair and beauty course. But then again, they're back on the same boat in terms of trying to find work. And so they might sign to a different course and do something else to try and open those opportunities up. But some of the underlying stuff that we're seeing, and what we had been seeing up until we sort of started YStar, and it's still not perfect today, but there's that motivation for young people. Actually, you speak to them, a lot of them are happy on the dole. They're happy just receiving money from, they're happy living with their parents. So they're doing that because there's no motivation. They can't see the other side yet. The purpose, So, and when we speak about employment, I guess that's the ultimate outcome or end goal of that transition to adulthood, is that they're now being independent enough to be able to bring in their own revenue and stuff. They're not reliant on mum, they're not reliant on the government and stuff. That's the ultimate end goal, ideally. But again, they might be in a job for 6 weeks, that could fall through, and then they're back on the dole again. There's some of those key life lessons that they just haven't been taught. A key one is like financial personal management. Even I struggle with that, and I guess part of that as well is maybe it's the income that they're receiving. It isn't that actually high in comparison to what I think about solo mums, for example, that we support now. And if they were to work, actually, I don't know if that's going to be, maybe it's a few $30 extra a week, but for them, there's also the stresses of childcare and what sort of stuff as well. So it's like, there's just the circle that it's just really hard to get off. And a lot of that comes from those underlying issues, the whānau engagement, really what is the family support for these young people like? While the boss might fire them because they haven't been showing up to work, what they don't understand is that, this young person in particular has been homeless for 3 nights a week because mum's kicked them out and she doesn't want to see them again. Stuff like that real tangible problems in our community that it's just not getting answered as no one's really picking it up, because at the end of the day, let's just throw them into employment because that makes the world a better place. But there's a lot of stuff that just needed to happen firstly.
Yeah. And you don't solve someone being homeless by sending them on a skills course.
No, that's right.
Like that's a social,
That's right.
A personal social issue that requires almost a level of friendship.
That's right. Yeah.
To care about, like, hey, where are you sleeping tonight, or how are you getting your next meal?
Exactly.
Like,
And you mentioned it before, Ryan, in terms of the community has the answers, and that's because, of course, the community are those people around that young person who are able to identify, perhaps see that, whereas where a government agency will struggle to identify those most in need, because by definition they've fallen through the gaps, so to speak. They're not on the grid. Maybe they're on the benefits is one way to kind of measure, but maybe they're not, or maybe they're kind of in and out.
well, and also you're saying the community has the answers, but that's because you can actually belong to a community, right? And belonging, with belonging comes love, it comes care, it comes people actually, giving a damn about where you're sleeping tonight, or, hey, you might have behaved incredibly atrociously, but you're still one of us, and so therefore we have a responsibility to you. Like, those things are intangible, and they can't be kind of devolved to a program, right? Talking about Why Start, like what do you do with Why Start as your sort of program for NEETs, or for young people who are looking for engagement and how to get into training, all that sort of stuff? Yeah, how do you identify when someone needs Why Start, and then what do you do with them?
Yeah, I'll backtrack a little bit. So I guess Why Start really was when the opportunity for us to go for this. And to be honest, in talking about funding, I suppose for NGO and for most communities, for example, funding is the key issue. And it can be in terms of things like when HPR was announced and...
HPR, sorry.
He Poutama Rangatahi. When that sort of funding became available to us, I guess that enabled us to really think a little bit out of the box in terms of how would we approach... What would something that we could do to make a small amount of difference?
And sorry, I'm going to ask you to explain a little bit. Hippotama Rangatahi, what is that?
Hippotama Rangatahi essentially is... no, it's all good. So essentially, my understanding of it, I'll be quite careful, is that essentially when the PGF was established, the Provincial Go Fund, one of the things that they identified especially was in some of the rural areas of the regions of New Zealand was that it's great to sort of throw this money out here to create these jobs and employment stuff, but they identified that young people actually need a bit of support in terms of that space too. So my understanding is that He Poutama Rangatahi was established to sort of address that problem of actually how do we support young people to get into work, sustainable work. Rowan, you might know a little bit more about that than me, but that's my understanding of it. I guess for us, it made funding available where we had not been able to get that funding before, essentially, and it enabled us to create a program from scratch that really was for me being involved in this sort of youth sector for how many years. It was one of the things I identified that, actually we can't just throw young people at work and expect them to just be in sustainable employment. It's not going to work out. What the young people really need, I sort of talked on before, is those real foundational and basic life skills, basic, how to build your confidence up. Have they even got a birth certificate or a bank account? Often we're finding young people, they're going to work, the money's going straight into their partner's account or their mum's account, and they're not seeing a dime of it. So I think there's a few things there that we just need to get right, and it's essentially covering the basics first. So our program is really looking at creating these, they're called kaiarahi or navigators. I've just been to Armageddon recently. Essentially what the dream was is that we're creating these sort of superheroes for the community, for young people, to take a small cohort of young people, up to 40 over the 2 years, to do some really intensive pastoral care engagement. So essentially taking a young person, meeting them where they're at. So maybe they're at work and income at a seminar and we meet them, or they're just a referral, or they just come through the doors at youth space and they just want to work. We'll take them through the basics of, okay, so where are you at in life at the moment? Like, do you have a safe space to sleep? Do you have some of the basic fundamental needs of a person? All the way to transition them into, okay, so we can talk about jobs. What does your dream job look like, and what is it going to take for you to get there? And I guess that's the key thing there. We're not just trying to throw them into work. We really want to support this young person to be on a sustainable pathway going forward, whether that's work or whether that's actually signing up to a course at North Tech, which is one of our local polytechnics, to do mechanics if that's what they really want to do, or to link them in with a local employer that can potentially take them, take them on kind of like an apprenticeship, or just to do some work experience each week. That's kind of where that program was at. Essentially, that was really born from my own experiences as a young person, knowing that, I've had these key mentors in my life that have just given a damn about me and supported me and actually walked the journey with me, rather than just saying, you need to be at this place over here at this time. They'll actually pick me up in the morning, drive me there, sit in the interview with me, actually talk to me and debrief with me afterwards, and just let me be able to unpack and actually understand the way of the world, essentially. That was really what the core of YStart is all about, essentially.
Rowan, going from Whangarei right out to all of New Zealand again. I mean, we were talking before about, this cohort and the COVID response, and essentially how much we might expect that COVID might be sort of a magnitude greater in terms of the problems for this cohort of young people. How have the government, as one sort of part in the puzzle, how have the government responded to COVID in ways that might specifically help young people in this transitional phase?
Well, one thing that the government did commit to in the 2020 budget was an expansion of He Potama Rangatahi. So I think, and that's something in the paper that we highlighted, because it is something really to support and to encourage, which has been quite a different approach than has been taken by previous governments, because it is about equipping those on the ground close to young people and giving them the means, which I think is a great role for the government to play, rather than some of the previous kind of infrastructure that we've seen around youth NEET, which have been, Ryan highlighted the focus on getting young people off the benefit, which is a very specific way of kind of reading kind of youth outcomes, and also kind of measuring outcomes, and it serves a certain purpose, but it's, as Ryan again highlights, it doesn't actually address necessarily long-term outcomes, and that's probably a recurring problem with government programs, the big government programs, is that it's very difficult for an agency which is set up and is incentivized to help this identified kind of category of young people, youth NEETs, to transition in this sort of cycle, for them to then walk with them after. I mean, they sort of finish them and leave them at the door and say, off you go.
I guess by definition, a sort of a government department needs to have measurements and accountabilities, and it's just like, are your measurements going up or down?
Yes,
and if you're working on a national level, it's like, well, we need these measurements to be going down. So
yeah, and so even a lot of there's been some good work around the Māori Pacific training schemes, which have done really well to attend to some of the more specific kind of conditions and circumstances that, say, Māori and Pacifica youth face, and some of the kind of cultural and social kind of context of their lives. But even then, it's very hard once you've completed a set training for them. Young people need support. Usually it's for a period of up to sort of 6 months in a new role, where they're sort of, as Ryan says, they're learning the habits, they're learning the techniques and the strategies of dealing with people, working with people, financial sort of matters, filling out timesheets correctly is something which, I don't know, you don't just pick up. It's not just something you can assume people know how to do. So there's all these little tricky things, and it's a period of transition. So in the paper we highlighted as getting work ready, and it's work readiness, and that is a process. It's a process. It's not just something that happens on day one, and it's often kind of difficult and fraught, and by nature is going to have problems and teething issues and full of mishaps. So those are things that I think WISE is good at helping, identifying and working through some of those challenges.
I guess when we're approaching this next season of kind of New Zealand's economic performance, and looking ahead, there's the getting young people work ready. So that's solving a problem that is kind of always there, right? You've got young people who, I mean, like my parents did, I think about the fact that, everything that Ryan's talking about, my parents just sort of did that as part of raising me, but that's not everyone's experience. And so there's always going to be this gap between, people who are sort of high performing because of the community that they grew up in, and people who kind of missed out on those things. And so lifting up young people to give them those experiences that they might have missed out on for whatever reason, that's always going to be the case. Don't worry, Ryan, you're always going to have a job. But I guess what we're talking about here with COVID and previously with the GFC, there's a supply of job question as well. So there was I remember, Rowan, you sort of in one of your op-eds talked about the fact that there were early on in the lockdown there were these sort of lovely sort of human interest piece stories about the Air New Zealand pilot who got a job stocking shelves for a supermarket, and it was like, hey, he managed to find a job, and you were kind of like, well, yeah, but what about the sort of 16-year-old who that would have been their first job? In your research, what have you sort of canvassed as ways that the government can make sure that when we have a shrinking supply of jobs, that young people actually have the ability to sort of get that leg up on the career ladder when the bottom rungs have been taken out?
Yeah, and I suppose there has been a kind of dominant assumption that we talk about the workforce and these waves of unemployment, and young people are kind of nestled in those waves of unemployment. And there's a lot of assumptions that they will, like the rest of the workforce, kind of muddle through and adapt and pivot to new. But the problem you've highlighted is that young people don't have the experience, they don't have the connections, they don't have the background to pivot. So part of what the paper argues is quite simply, we need to actually stop and think about the very specific needs that young people have, that they can't be thought of as just like any other part of the workforce. Yeah, I suppose part of it is creating the better connections between groups of young people, communities, these kind of intergenerational relationships that we've seen, and businesses in specific localities. And I think something that we wanted to highlight in the paper, and it comes through in the different kind of case studies that we explore, is that when you give communities the sense of ownership that they need to feel about this issue, that we can often think, oh well, the government needs to fix this, but actually we as New Zealanders, all New Zealanders, should feel responsibility, and I think something we wanted to encourage in the paper by drawing on examples like WISE and also other case studies before the GFC in Otarahanga and in the last couple of years in places like Tauranga, where communities have taken ownership, and they've, instead of looking for external solutions, they've looked for solutions within their community, within the businesses, and within the opportunities within that community.
The fact that we have Ryan sitting here with us here today kind of tips off that we think that what he's doing is probably a good thing. Ryan, if someone is listening to this today and they're like, oh man, I've got, my teenagers are about to leave school and they seem supremely unmotivated and lack hope around, being able to find a job or being able to find an internship opportunity like their older brother or sister might have a few years ago. What for you, having worked with young people and sort of, zeroing in on that purpose kind of discussion, what would you recommend people, how do they start that conversation and what opportunities should they be looking for?
It's funny, I was just listening and sort of reflecting on the conversation, and I guess thinking about young people in general really feels like that despite COVID, I think that's really given us opportunity to really take another look at actually how society is going at the moment in terms of the employment market and stuff. And it's actually said, look, the bubble's burst. This is where we're at. What do we need to do to sort of change? But I think, we're talking about stuff that's been going on for years, and I was just reading the paper. I mean, it's been underlying some of the issues and challenges of NEETs and that young people have been going through. It's been around for years, and I just think that the key thing really is the motivation. And so my advice, I guess, for parents or for anybody that's working alongside young people is, treat it by case basis. Every young person's different. Everyone's got different sort of motivations, and everyone's got different incentive factors that need to be considered in terms of what decisions they make. I'm also really aware that young people, can be quite naive at times, and that sometimes the avenues that have been in place before, such as, dad's always worked at a butchery, for example, or, dad's a welder, or mum's always worked at the bank, or she's running her own business or whatever. Sometimes young people won't want to do that. I really get that, and I hear that often. We'll say, here's a job here. It's pretty good money. It's a great opportunity for you to get some experience in whatever it is. But for whatever sake and reason, the young person would not like to do that. Rather, they know they can make money on YouTube playing Fortnite. And that's much more attractive to them. Exactly, TikTok. Which I guess puts everyone in, it's because it's changing, and it feels like the paradigm has sort of changed, and young people want to be the change makers. We want to be innovative. We want to be the ones leading these new ideas and trends and stuff like that. That actually what our parents are saying to us, it gets filtered through all that other stuff, the culture of today. I reflect that parents didn't have to subscribe to Netflix and everything like that when they were younger, so it was much easier for them to really see where the money's going in terms of that financial management and stuff. Whereas a young person, they're trying to keep up the latest iPhone, all these latest trends, and it's not just young people from sort of reasonably well-off backgrounds or middle backgrounds. It's the young people that I'm working with that don't have very strong parenting involved in their lives, or they don't have some real key supports, but they're staying up to date with the latest cultural trends. And I guess that's where it creates the issue. So I guess my advice, back to the question, is that it's really working with the young person on the motivation and what supports can you put in place to wrap around them to get them to a really good place to go forward. And that could be, again, work, or it could be actually looking at some different study options, or actually getting outside of the norm to explore different opportunities that might like them, they might like. Yeah, I know it's real basic, but yeah.
What's it like? I mean, I'm sure you would have had these kind of conversations where a young person, doesn't actually have much of a vision for what the future can look like for them. How do you progress that conversation and go, hey, actually, I can see how your life could go. Can I invite you into a bit of this vision? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what happened to me. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I'm sure everyone says they still don't know now, but my purpose was to just get up. My daughter went to daycare. She'll go to daycare, and I'll just play Xbox all day. That was what I wanted to do, So it wasn't until someone invited me into a line of work that they were doing, and I just got involved voluntarily, that I said, oh, wow, this has actually opened up a new window for me to say, actually, this might be what I want to do with my life going forward. So I guess, taking advantage of those opportunities too. And it might just be saying, actually, I noticed that my son's, he likes to build or something like that. So I might try and link him in with a local builder to just see if he's got some work that he could take him under his wing. He doesn't have to pay him, but just to give him a few days. And the incentive is that, I don't know, maybe he gets some money from his parents in the week. I don't know. I mean, there's incentives for everything, but I guess it is that exactly. It's trying to show and create opportunities for them that they wouldn't be able to navigate for themselves, essentially. And that's a role that either youth worker could do, a parent could do, as you were saying before, But I guess at the end of the day, that's what we need to do as a community, is really make the most of those opportunities and just take them.
And what was the difference for you between someone who came along and been like, hey, Ryan, you're not going to spend another day playing Xbox, that's just lame, get off the couch and do some work. And you're being like, stuff off, playing Xbox is way more fun. And this invitation that you had from a guy who was like, hey, come and do this thing. I mean, what was it about his approach that made you go, oh, that seems like something I want to do?
To be honest, I didn't want to go, I didn't want to go because it's... Here I was 15, I didn't have any friends. I was literally, it was just me and my partner and her mum and my baby. But that was my bubble. I was happy with that. I was content. I didn't want to go into public. I didn't want to catch the bus was a huge task. That anxiety and I think that's on the rise now more than ever for young people, is that anxiety. Having to just navigate the world, it's just so hard now, especially with everything else that's been going on, social media and all those different things in terms of connectivity with people, that it scared me to say, I don't want to sit in this room full of strangers, But I think what it was for me was he didn't give up, he came around and he said, you would like to do this? And I said, oh, yeah, I don't know, probably not. He followed up. So I think a few days later, he came around and brought me a hot chocolate and some food and just built that rapport. And that was really the key thing, was okay, I feel like, this guy's actually really making effort here for me. I'll reciprocate and I'll go along to this dad's workshop group thing, as lame as I thought it sounded at the time. But just that invite there and the way that he went about that was definitely the catalyst.
Just to finish us off, Rowan, when you've sat down and you've talked to people about your research and you sort of explain to them what a NEAT is and you get past all that sort of stuff, I mean, what are the takeaways that you hope to leave people with out of this research? What you hope can change in terms of the way that people think about sort of the problems that are facing youth when it comes to employment and stuff like that at the moment?
I suppose one thing I hope people take away from the conversations around the paper and around this question of youth and facing in recession in these challenging times really flows on from what Ryan was sharing there about trying to move beyond some of the stigma that we attach to young people we hear that so much, the rhetoric of let's boot them off the couch, that young people are lazy.
Yeah, harden up.
Yeah, they need to harden up. They need to just summon almost from within themselves the kind of willpower to actually just work. But we need to kind of stop that kind of language, and it makes for good kind of rhetoric, and it might sound good to older generations, but so we need to kind of switch on to actually young people are facing particular challenges, and we actually really owe them our attention and our care, in part because they are our future. So we're going to be relying on them
They are the future taxpayers.
They are our future taxpayers. We've just seen the biggest our national debt sort of blow up to pay to essentially get us through this economic crisis. Those young people are the ones who are going to be saddled with that debt. So we owe them a special care, working and sort of journeying with our young people. So I suppose it's something, listeners and readers of the paper should really think about, well, where are the young people in my community, and how can I be involved? And supporting the good work of organisations like WISE and Maxim. If I can put us in the same category.
Thanks for joining us for this month's podcast. To check out more of Maxim's research, analysis and commentary on the big issues facing New Zealand, head to our website maxim.org.nz, where you can sign up for Forum, our monthly email newsletter. We're also about to release the latest volume of our annual magazine, Flint and Steel, Volume 7, on recovery, repair and reconciliation. To pre-order your copy, head to flintandsteelmag.com, where you can also browse all the articles from our previous volumes. From all of us here on the Maxim Institute team, mā te wā, goodbye for now.